Hello, friends. Greg Koukl here. I'm your host for this show. The show is called Stand to Reason. And I have a little treat for somebody here. I have written this book called The Story of Reality. Zondervan published it. And there's, on occasion, there are requests from other countries to have the book translated into another language. And I received a package of 5 books. The Story of Reality in a language I don't read, and that language is Czech. Now, in a way, this is kind of interesting since people ask me about my last name and they say, well, where's that, or what ethnicity is that name? And I give them a chance to guess, and only one person in my experience has ever hit the nail on the head, that is, identified my actual ethnicity. But some have identified the country that is now the area where my ethnicity is from. And strictly speaking, my forebears are from Prague, and that is Central Bohemia. So I am Bohemian, or Česky if you like. And so here's a book now in Czech. It's called The Story of Reality. And I have 5 copies, and I they've been sitting on the floor of my study here for a month or so, and I didn't know what to do with them, since I know no Česky-speaking folk that would be interested in this book. But it occurred to me that maybe someone of you do know Czech-speaking people that would be interested in this book. So I'm very happy to let you have them if you contact us and ask for one or all. If you have a reasonable expectation, you could distribute all 5 of them to someone, and we'll ship them out to you at our cost, not a problem. You can contact us at 1-800, the number 2, and the word reason during office hours, and someone will take your call and arrange for shipment of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or whatever happens to be left. Okay, so there you go. That's kind of fun. And the publisher is 360 Degrees Rethink is what the name of the publisher is, which I'm telling you, this is a very high quality paperback. It looks actually better than the one that we have here. It's interesting that the Rethink is in the name of the publishers, because that's what we used to call Reality, which we just completed in Philly to another sold-out crowd, and it was wonderful being there and once again hearing the Enterprise, the whole series, all the speakers, especially the Friday night reality show. And we have one reality left. That's Augusta on April 21st and 22nd. Plenty of room there if you want to sign up. Just simply go to realityapologetics.com. Like I've said in the past, this is a unique, compared to any other reality that we've ever had. This one, I think, is the best. And I don't think I say that every year, but this one stands head and shoulders above the rest because of the particular way they're handling the instruction on Friday night rather, with the reality show, the Friday night reality show. And I won't, no spoilers here, or I won't show my hand. I'm going to breast my cards here, but you won't be disappointed. So if you're within striking distance of Augusta, and even if not, come anyway. The longest traveler, I should say, the individual traveled the furthest, or the farthest, or the farthest in this last reality came from South Korea. An American airman stationed in South Korea decided to take his holiday, his leave, by flying back to the States and coming to our event. And I specified, did you just happen to be back here from South Korea, or did you fly back for the event? He said, I flew back for the event. So, I mean, people fly from all over. We had, the states that I counted, they were as far away as Michigan, driving to Philly, 8.5 hours on the road. We also had, Ohio, 5.5 hours on the road, and, of course, lots of states kind of around the Pennsylvania area, Maryland and New Jersey and Connecticut and New York and Virginia. So it was a great group of people. Once again, April 21st and 22nd, Augusta, Georgia. Go to realityapologetics.com for all the information. Now, I am a bit sobered today for a number of reasons, but one of them is the news that I received, as many of you are aware of the shootings, another set of shootings of in a school where both adults and children were killed. This is a school in the Nashville area. And as I understand it now, there were 3 adults in their 60s that were murdered and 3 children around 9 years of age that were murdered. The murderer, again, as I understand it, was shot by the police and is also dead. So 6 homicides, 7 fatalities. And what's unique about this particular incident, and therefore creating a unique response, and when I say unique, I don't mean necessarily good. I certainly don't mean that in this case. But what was unique about this particular school shooting was that this was a Christian school. And in fact, one of the kids that was murdered was the pastor's child, I think son. And the one who was the killer, was it a daughter? Okay, daughter. The one who was the killer was a transgender male. It's a biological woman, transgender male. Now, I don't usually like talking about these things because part of me says, what's to say? This is tragic. And, there could be discussions about gun control or gun availability, the wisdom of signs on schoolyards that say gun-free zone, which that wasn't the case as far as I know with regards to this school. There be discussions about mental health of the individuals that perpetrate these things, the climactic circumstances, cultural climate that may lend itself to these kinds of things. And frankly, I don't know what to say about most of that. I have convictions about guns, and just a simple observation. I want to cause a lot of trouble, but it's just something to think about, is that gun violence like that is almost always stopped by another gun, either the assailant's own gun in a suicide, or a policeman's gun, or some other citizen who is armed who takes action to take out the shooter. You guys could just think about that. But most of the time, I don't even talk about it because all these other details are very, very hard to assess. The psychological state of the shooter, what was going on. I know most people like to make political statements about these things, which I think generally is not wise because it's hard to draw conclusions about those kinds of things from acts of violence like this, unless the shooter's on record in a very particular way regarding motives, et cetera, et cetera. So I just bypass this. I figure everybody else is talking about it, and it gets talked to death. But like I said, this situation is unique. And it's unique because the object of the shooting was a Christian school. The subjects of the shooter's malicious actions were Christian adults and children, and the shooter, which generally speaking it would be irrelevant to me, is a transgendered male, meaning a biological female. I actually don't care about that. It's not relevant to me. But it is relevant to some people. And I want to read something to you that I think is alarming in virtue of what it says about a section of our society and our culture. And my first time through this, it was a bit of a jaw dropper, and I thought, I don't need to make any commentary at all about this. I just need to read it. And the problem with it is self-evident. Now, having gone through it a second time and giving it a harder look, I might end up saying some things. But I do think that the content is self-explanatory about the concern that I have. This was a media statement delivered March 27th. No, I'm sorry. It's a media statement regarding the March 27th, 2023 school shooting in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a news release from the Trans Resistance Network. And the Trans Resistance Network, self-identified here on the news release, is a collective of experienced organizers, committed allies, and concerned groups who are coming together for the long-term survival and well-being of gender-diverse people in a more extreme environment. And the implication is that these gender-diverse people are in a more extreme environment, or many of them are, and so this group, the Trans Resistance Network, is meant to help them in that environment, all right? So let me just read it for you. The Trans Resistance Network has been notified the shooter involved in today's church school shooting in Nashville, Tennessee was a person identifying as transgender, known from online profiles as Aiden or Aubrey Hale, he, him, in parentheses here. In other words, that's that individual's preferred pronouns. While it's not our policy to engage publicly with news media, we believe this moment calls for a thoughtful response from our collective. We point out that today's incident in Nashville, Tennessee, is not one tragedy, but two. The first tragedy today is the loss of the life of 3 children and adults. We extend our deepest sympathies and heartfelt prayers to those families dealing with the loss of loved ones. There is nothing we can offer that will comfort the hurt or ease the sorrow. We mourn with you. That paragraph, by the way, is 51 words, for the record. I continue. The second and more complex tragedy is that Aiden, or Aubrey Hale, now remember, this person who is identified as being a victim of tragedy is the shooter who just murdered 3 children and 3 adults. The second and more complex tragedy is that Aiden, or Aubrey Hale, who felt he had no other effective way to be seen than to lash out by taking the life of others and by consequence himself. Now, the consequence is the police shot him. That's my understanding. Her, I'm sorry. See, I'm following the pronouns that they're using, which is the gender preferred pronouns there. My accident. Continues, we do not claim to know the individual. I just have to pause here. We do not claim to know the individual or have access to their inner thoughts and feelings. Okay, didn't they just write is that Aubrey Hale felt he had no other effective way to be seen than to lash out by taking the life of others? And then the next sentence, we do not claim to know the individual or have access to their inner thoughts and feelings. Okay, make that with that what you like. I continue. We do know that life for transgender people is very difficult and made more difficult in the preceding months by a virtual avalanche of anti-trans legislation and public call-outs by right-wing personalities and political figures for nothing less than the genocidal eradication of trans people from society. Think about those words. The charge. Many transgender people deal with anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide, and PTSD from the near constant drumbeat of anti-trans hate. Lack of acceptance from family members and certain religious institutions, denial of our existence, and calls for detransition and forced conversion. Now, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to take each sentence or each phrase apart and say, is this true? What reason do we have to think these are true? I mean, you guys have your own experience in this culture with this kind of thing, and you can judge for yourself whether you think this is actually an accurate characterization. I continue. All of these factors contribute to a population that is medically underserved and who often face anti-trans bias while accessing care, leading to significant physical and mental health disparities. Hate has its consequences. It is a testament to the inner strength and beauty of transgender people that despite the overwhelming odds of homelessness, job discrimination, and constant anti-trans bigotry and violence, that so many of us continue to persevere, survive, and even thrive. We will not be eradicated or erased. Final paragraph. We remind the news media to respect the self-identified pronouns of transgender individuals who come across your desk. Aiden Hale self-identified with he, him pronouns on forward-facing sites. I think that means progressive sites. I'm not sure. But in any event, we also urge you to avoid pandering to those individuals on the right who will use this double tragedy to torment fear. I think they meant foment fear, but here it says torment fear and terror of transgender people in order to advance a political agenda of transgender elimination. Biased and sensationalized coverage of these viewpoints is both irresponsible and reprehensible. Now, I guess you could decide for yourself. That's the end of the piece. You can decide for yourself whether this particular news release is in any sense biased and meant to advance a political agenda regarding transgender people. You can decide for yourself whether it seems sensationalized or not, and if so, if it's irresponsible and reprehensible. I will say this, though. I said 51 words. I didn't count the words of the rest of the piece. 51 words of condolence, and that's one 3-line paragraph. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs of the rest that I read. Which it's hard not to take, in some sense, as a veiled justification for what happened. I honestly don't know how anyone could read this piece and also accept at face value the extended deepest sympathies and heartfelt prayers for the families who have lost their loved ones, and that these folks mourn, these folks responsible for these mourn. I don't believe that, especially when it's so obvious to me that this was an opportunity taken by this group to advance a cause with very forceful rhetoric and obvious distortion of the facts to make a point, trading on this terrible tragedy. Now, sometimes I think the legitimate points can be made, But the irony is all of this is a matter is all of this response is kind of presuming this tormented individual who did the killing was tormented in light of the cultural circumstances that are as the Trans Resistance Network describes them to be. From my perspective, I think you can't hardly hear a peep in public that is contrary to the trans movement. If you misgender, you can lose your job. The cacophony is coming from all on one side, and it's not from the right on this issue. When an abortion clinic got bombed or an abortionist got killed, which almost never happens, it's pretty amazing in light of what pro-lifers think is happening in those clinics, that every day children are being murdered. It's amazing how little violence there has been in light of that conviction. Nevertheless, when that happens, every pro-life organization is hounded to give an unqualified condemnation of such an action, as if the pro-life groups may be in favor of that, as if they're not given a charitable expectation that the pro-lifers have, since they're trying to defend life, think it's wrong to take the life of the abortionist. Nevertheless, this is what's required: unqualified condemnation. Okay, so now things are reversed. Now it's Christians that are being murdered. And because it's a trans person that murdered them, it must be because of the anguish the trans person experienced living in a culture where there are people who disagree with them and won't accede to the legitimacy of their view. And I guess my question is, what does this tell you about the culture? This isn't everybody on this trans resistance network doesn't represent anybody but them. Don't know how big their numbers are. But that's something like this could be published as a news release in light of what happened yesterday? This is not a defense. Yeah, it's terrible. We went with the people, but after all, I mean, please, look at how trans people are so brutalized in this country. Sooner or later, somebody's going to pop. You know, when I hear things like that, and that's implicit in this whole statement, I wonder, why aren't more Christians killing themselves? Because the group that gets the most verbal assault in this culture, at least from the gatekeepers. I mean, I'm not counting every slur that goes down, but there certainly is no sensitivity to using God's name in a vulgar way or Jesus' name in a vulgar way across the board. If you include all that, the group that gets the most heat, so to speak, are the Christians. Much more than anyone else, certainly than trans. Christians aren't going out of their way to make things hard on trans people. They allow people to have their own views. They are just asking to be allowed to have their own. That's it. Well, there is also a move to protect athletes who are unfairly discriminated against. Those athletes would be women who are competed against by men, male bodies, whose gender identity is female. It's irrelevant what they identify as. The fairness has to do with their bodily capability. There's a reason why we have female sports and male sports. It has nothing to do with gender identity. It has to do with physical bodies. So there's been legislation passed about that, but that's to protect women. principally, who are athletes and work hard in their life to be good athletes and to be recognized for that. And then some second-rate male athlete identifies as a woman and then wipes out all the female competition? That's not just. Where's the justice? So there's legislation about that. There's legislation that's been passed that says, you can't promote transgender surgeries with people who are minors. They're not old enough to make this decision. You can't give them the liberty to do that. When they turn 18, fine. So is this genocidal legislation? It's just another evidence of, and I'm not whining or crying, I'm just observing. The Christians are looming, faithful Christians, biblical Christians, are looming larger and larger in the sights of the culture. And I just realized I didn't do it on purpose, but there's an odd literalism to that. Because these 6 people were in the gun sights of a killer yesterday who murdered them. Why? I don't know what's going to come out, but it's clear that the Trans Resistance Network is doing its level-headed best to give you their take on it. In fact, they state it, even though they acknowledge they don't know the individual or what their inner thoughts were. We do know that, though they acknowledge they don't know the inner thoughts, I'm checking the wording again. Aubrey Hale apparently felt, they don't even say apparently. The second and more complex tragedy is that Aubrey Hale felt he had no other effective way to be seen than to lash out by taking the life of others and by consequence himself. They even sanitize that by consequence. In other words, while he's murdering kids and adults, the cops take, I said him again, because that's what they're using, her out. It was a woman, a biological woman. What does this tell you about what we're in for? It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Be interesting to see how the rest of the world responds. Maybe the Trans Resistance Network is an outlier. That would be great. I hope that's the case. I don't think it will be. I think there are going to be other examples about this. If not formal statements like this, innuendo, suggestions. Well, that's tragic, but by the way, if you guys had been nicer, maybe she wouldn't have shot you. All right, let's take a break. Coming to calls after this on Stand to Reason. All right, I'm just looking at this statement again. I counted the lines, not the words. 3 lines of consolation and 20 lines of de facto justification. And at the very bottom it says requests for interviews will be referred back to this statement. Requests for interviews will be referred back to this statement. Oh, you want to talk about it? Read the statement. We're not going to discuss it any further. So any attempt in an interactive way to verify the kinds of claims that were made in this statement, we're not going to do that. That's what they're saying. All right, well, it's their privilege, right, whatever. Before we get to calls, just wanted to let you know that there's a new SCRU course that's coming out March 31st. That's in a couple of days for me. And the course is taught by Mr. B, and it's titled Are Science and Faith Compatible? And he's going to answer. Tim Barnett will, in this 5-part course, that challenge, and also make the point that studying the natural world can actually draw you to God and strengthen your confidence in Him. You can go to str.org or just go to training.str.org. That'll take you right to the site. If you go to the website, the home page in the upper right-hand corner, I think, is the icon that you can click for STRU. A reminder, in Augusta, Georgia, our last reality of this season, April 21st and 22nd. Sign up at realityapologetics.com. Alan and Tim will be speaking this weekend at the Equip Youth Conference, Friday, March 31st and through April 1st. So that's Friday, Saturday, I guess. That's in Barrie, Ontario, Canada. So you get 2 birds with 1 stone at that event, and odd birds they are, but it's going to be a great conference. The Equip Youth Conference in Barrie, Ontario. Alan will also be speaking at Redeemer Bible Church in Spotsylvania, Virginia, on Friday and Saturday, April 14 and 15. And Tim will be at Mount Airy Bible Church in Mount Airy, Maryland, on Saturday and Sunday, April 29th and 30. By the way, I've been to that church before, teaching conferences. Great. And then he's going to visit Calvary Chapel Olympia in Olympia, Washington on Wednesday, May 3rd. One last note, Amy Hall will be doing a live Q&A on STR's Facebook on our page there on Wednesday, May 3rd at 1 p.m. So that's still about 6 weeks out, but put it on your calendar. Everybody likes talking to Amy. She has great insight. Many of you know that. Because of you're listening to #STRask. Okay, let's go to Toronto, Canada, down the bottom right. Is that right, Amy? That's the first one? Yeah, okay. We're going to go to Timothy in Toronto, Canada. Tim.
Good day, Greg.
Hey.
It's been a while.
Yes. Is my buddy Tim?
It is.
The fisherman.
It is.
Nice talking to you.
Yeah. So I was sitting in an elders meeting this week, and we were doing corporate prayer, and I realized, I'm going to say it in a punch in the nose kind of way, that STR and Greg Koukl has ruined corporate prayer for me. Because I was trying to, become, really get in there, and every second person would say something that just triggers something I've learned from STR and my friend Greg, and it just gets my mind spinning. Is this one of those hills to die on? To ever bring it up with them, or just let it go? And my mind consistently gets pulled off track. What we're trying to do there, and I realized that actually happens a lot. That was just the moment where it struck me.
Yeah.
And I realized this happens all the time. I don't enjoy corporate prayer because I know I'm going to hear these things. And anyway, I just thought maybe you had something to...
Well, I do, and as it turns out, I think Amy told you, we actually dealt with your question on #STRask this morning, so it'll come out later, and where we both kind of give our input, but I'm happy to respond. This is a little different audience, and talk about this concern. And this is something we've heard before, okay? We've heard, because people will say, and it's not just about prayer, it's about theological things and or thinking carefully about what the Bible says and practicing the habit of never reading a Bible verse, so you take the context into consideration when you're making your decision about what the author intended to mean. And when you gain those skills, you end up going to sermons, church services, listening to pastors, teachers, radio shows, whatever it happens to be, and you're aware of all the problems, and it's annoying. Now, of course, you could ask yourself, in the area of preaching and stuff like that, taking verses out of context and getting the wrong understanding of them, that's a little bit more serious than just mentioning verses inappropriately during prayer, but having a prayer that still is a good prayer. Okay, so that's just kind of annoying. But the other, it can be dangerous because it teaches not only is the content that's being preached as God's word no longer God's word when it's mischaracterized, just like your word or my word, Tim, would not be really our words if people abuse them or make them sound like they mean something else. That's not, we're not the author of that idea. Okay. So that's a problem. And it's also a problem if they model that behavior before their people, then their people get in the bad habit of doing that too. But in the case of prayer, it's just kind of annoying. But it's also annoying when I hear people pray and every other word is just, and they use God's name like a punctuation mark, and Jesus and God and Father. And sometimes they even double up on the word Father, Father. They do that way because they got to throw the punctuation mark in, and then they're addressing God, and so they say Father, Father. Well, that's annoying too. But the prayer is a genuine prayer and an honorable one, other than the fact, even though it's a bit annoying to listen to. And so, what I have tried to do for myself is just overlook those things, just look past those things, and not fuss about them when they're not weighty issues. Someone might say, "Okay, Lord, I'm thank you that wherever two or three are gathered, here you are in our midst." And we're going to agree, so you answer the prayer. And they're citing this passage from Matthew, 18 or whatever, and they're misusing it because Jesus wasn't talking about group prayer. He was talking about discipline in the church. And so, although it does explain something for me, Tim, I wonder why I don't get my prayers answered when I'm praying by myself. And now I realize it's because Jesus isn't here with me. He's over with that other group of two or three people. He's out there. He's not here, which is kind of a silly application of the notion. It shows how inappropriate the concept is when you apply it that way. But the point, I think you mentioned about hill to die on, and I agree that this, especially in group prayer, it's probably not one of them. Even with pastors, making mistakes, if you don't have a in with the pastor or an opportunity to speak with the pastor, generally you don't, you just let it ride. Now, in my daughter's school, there was something being taught in her Bible class. There were two things being taught. I thought that they're really problematic, and they were being taught to my daughter. And so I had to talk with my daughter and say, these two things are not sound, honey. And then I went to the headmaster, and I said, I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble. I'm just letting you know. But then I quizzed the headmaster about, in this case, the book of Hebrews. And is it your understanding this? Yes. And this? Yes. And this? Okay. So we both agree on this. Oh, okay. So this is what was taught, which was contrary to what we both agreed on. And the thing was important,
Okay.
so I didn't just blurt it all out. I tried to be a little cagey the way I expressed it. And then I said, look, I got my hat in my hand here. I'm not your boss. I'm not telling you how to run your school, but I am expressing a concern here, and I'll just leave it with you. You can do what you think is best. And so I respected his leadership. That's the way to do that if you actually have to talk to a pastor or a leader about some concern. But that can backfire easily if you're not careful. Probably in most cases, it's just better to be, tolerant, I guess, in the classical sense of the word, and let it ride, and then eat the meat and throw away the bones. All right? Just disregard the psychobabble, the religious psychobabble, or the verses that are cited that really don't apply, but the heart of the prayer could still be entirely genuine, unless they're claiming a promise that isn't theirs. And then, if they're claiming a promise that isn't theirs, well, they don't get what they're claiming because it's not their promise. So they basically wasted their breath, but there's no need probably to correct them unless you think that you have an opportunity that will be respected, opportunity to speak where your idea will be respected. And this is something Amy talked quite a bit about in the response in #STRask. And you'll hear more than when you listen to that, Tim. But we all have different gifts, and it maybe their gift is such that it doesn't, and their education, whatever, is such that they are naive regarding the misuse of the verse. And someone like yourself with better training might be in a position to carefully and graciously um, lift them up in correction, to help them out with an attitude of service, not an attitude of, you idiot, you got it wrong. Here's the right answer. I got the right answer. So there's an opportunity for that, but again, that needs to be carefully handled, because some people are not that teachable, or they don't have the ego strength to be disagreed with, or something like that. I don't know. So I guess the simple answer is most of that you let go, and then you try not to be internally critical of it, and you eat the meat and throw away the bones. Maybe you'll have an opportunity to help a person understand the truth a little bit more accurately, but you must tread softly when you do that, either with a regular folk or leadership. There are liabilities in both cases. So, what do you think,
Well,
Mr.
that's
Zub?
what I have been. That's what I have been doing. Yeah, this one kind of spurred me because we have some important things to do. We're searching for a pastor, and people were asking God to work and do things in ways that I'm the student of this decision making stuff,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So I'm just there. We're asking God to do things in a way that He really doesn't do things very often. And,
Yeah, well,
so I just,
what if that's the way they're looking for the pastor? God, give us a hint at least. Then they might take a hint that's not a hint and then make a bad choice. So I don't know what your relationship with the leadership is, but you might say something like, maybe we should be asking what kind of spiritual qualifications this pastor has, looking for a person with A, B, C, D, whatever scriptural qualifications are there. Now, if you can have that impact on them and then they look for those qualifications, they may just interpret the process of using those biblical qualifications as the way God is trying to tell them who He wants to be on their team as a pastor. Okay, well, there's still confusion there, but at least the confusion is managed and they're applying biblical criteria regarding that decision. Don't know, but I know it is
my guess is
frustrating.
they're going to talk this way and pray this way, and then we're going to do it exactly the way you talk about it in decision making, and we'll do it as a group of mature, wise elders of a church. It's just funny that we have to go
Yeah,
talk
I
about it
know
differently for.
it's the window dressing with this other thing that
Yeah,
makes it sound more legitimate. Well, we want your will. We want the one you chose for us, and that presumes that God is doing the choosing independently. And it also assumes something else, of course, you know this, that we have to figure out what God has chosen so that we can choose. And then we kind of
I
follow
think
the
that's me.
hints. When I believe in the sovereignty of God, and I know you do too, but that doesn't mean that He is going to tell you what His sovereign purpose is. We are the ones that have to make the decisions, and then He gives us criteria that will allow us to do that. And especially when it comes to church leadership, that's pretty important.
Okay, thanks. So, yeah, two things. I'm going to go up and see those guys in Barrie this week, and
Oh,
my
okay.
father
Tim and
my
Al.
father. I'm going to take a whole van load of people up there.
Oh, great.
And my father's got a sister in Prague, so I would like one of those books.
Oh, okay. Well, be sure to call in right away. So, in fact, after we're done, you can call in if you want and get
Okay.
one, because I just let it open. Whoever will may come, and they can get as many as they want. If somebody's got a bunch of Czech friends, they might get 5 books. So I want you to get yours. In fact, at the break, maybe I'll just run in and say, hey, save one for Tim Zub, because he's calling in.
There you go.
All right,
Thank
Tim?
you so much.
All right. It's
Thank
great.
you.
You're welcome, and good talking to you, brother. Bye-bye. Let's go to break, and I'll give the message about Tim's book, and then I'll be back with more calls on Stand to Reason. All right, final hour, final segment this hour. I'm going to go to Jason in California here in a moment, but Jason is thinking, does he really think it'll feel like an hour to talk to me for 10 minutes? I don't know. Well, let's talk to Jason and see what he thinks. Jason, sorry about that mistake.
Hello, Greg.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
What's up?
I have a moral question for you.
All right.
I moonlight as an Uber driver, and I've been contemplating whether or not I bear any moral culpability for transporting people to do sinful things, particularly when I know they're going to do sinful things. And what occasioned this was a news story that you may or may not have heard about maybe a year or two ago of an Uber driver who had picked up a girl, and soon afterwards he realized that she was going to a Planned Parenthood and was going to abort her baby. And he was against abortion. He felt that if he took her to that destination that he would be morally culpable, for the abortion. So he stopped the ride, told her she had to get out, and of course Uber ended up firing him for that. And my initial thought, being a fellow Uber driver, is like, what would I do in that situation?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, he has a job to do. He's not morally responsible for what she does once she arrives at her destination. His job is just to take people to and fro.
Mm-hmm.
And, any more than I'm responsible for what Target does with my money after I buy something at Target.
Right.
I know that they're going to spend some of that money on things that I would consider evil, but I'm not morally culpable for how they spend my money after I give it to them.
Correct.
So that was my initial thought. He should have the freedom of conscience to do what he did, but I didn't think that it was necessary. But then I thought, what if that same girl had told me that she had a gun and was on the way to kill her boyfriend because she found out he was cheating?
Mm-hmm.
Would I have completed that ride, or would I have stopped and said, no, I don't want to have any part with this, and felt that I would be, bear some of the moral culpability if I dropped her off and then she kills the guy?
Mm-hmm.
And in that situation, I felt like I would be morally culpable. But of course, the born are just as, they have the same moral value as the unborn. So
Right.
if it would be wrong in one, it would be wrong in the other.
Right.
So,
it's
what do you think
it's a very good question, and I think that you've hit all the right markers. So it's hat tip to you. But I do think this is a challenging question, especially when you consider the alternative. And generally speaking, if people who are if it's a sin, if one participates in the sin of immoral people by transporting them to some place where they're going to do something immoral, well, I mean, that would be just about every passenger at one level or another is going somewhere and will end up doing something immoral, even yours truly, whatever that is, thoughts or whatever. So, but I do think that it's definitely clear to me how it could feel different when you're talking about an abortion clinic, or especially the parallel if she's got a gun and she's going to kill her boyfriend. Now, the reason I'm balking a little bit is because it seems very clear that if you have a woman with a gun who has this intention, stopping the car and not letting her do it is the right thing to do, and you're going to get supported by everybody. Okay, if you do the same thing with a person who's going to Planned Parenthood to get an abortion, well, she's going to get the abortion one way or another, whether you drive her or somebody else drives her. And then by stopping, you're going to lose your job, or something. I don't know. I don't know if there's any other alternative, but this is where, if it were me, I'd want to say, I'm not going to drive you any farther if this is what I know you're going to do. I will call another Uber driver that will show up right here, and I will pay your fare or whatever. It doesn't matter. No, you don't want to do that. But I'm just trying to make the circumstance such that that you can protect your job without participating in this thing that you think is deeply immoral. Now, I think a driver, and I don't know what happened to the other Uber driver, but I think that they would have a legitimate concern or a case to take against Uber and say, look, this is a violation of my religious convictions. And had I known this was the case, I wouldn't have taken this ride. Somebody else could have done it. But I have a right to say, I'm not going to drive this person to do that thing? What if they were a drug dealer? And the issue isn't whether drug dealing is illegal and abortions are legal. That's not the issue. The issue is about your personal conscience. And so there ought to be latitude for that. But you
Right.
can't expect Uber to give you that latitude, and this is where you're going to have to count the cost. Now, some people may not feel complicit in that behavior that follows the Uber ride if they give the ride. And this is, and you mentioned this too. There's a matter of personal conscience that weighs in, that factors in here. But I think it's a challenging situation. Let me just put it that way. And when in doubt, don't do it. Don't do the thing that would violate your conscience. This kind of circumstance is actually, I suspect, pretty rare. But nevertheless, it did happen once. And in principle, I think it'd be,
Yeah.
there are a broader range of things that are involved here. But I don't think it's, it's hard to imagine anything else. So wait a minute, hold the car. We're going to rob that bank, and just keep the meter running. Obviously you're not going to participate in that. You won't be required to. Nobody's going to ask you to do that. But what if they took you to a bunch of men to a gentleman's club, so-called, a strip joint? Okay, would you drop them off and then let them, deal with that? In my case, if I were the driver, I wouldn't push them out of the car because the place they were going to is a strip joint, even though what they were doing is not right. I guess a lot depends on the gravity of it too. So, what I'm doing is knocking a couple things around here, aspects of this, and you thought this through pretty well, but it's hard to say what the clear-cut answer is. It kind of depends on the circumstances. I guess I would say no to the abortion clinic, but I would be a bit unsettled or miffed by the strip club, but I wouldn't, if guys have said, yeah, we're on our way to the strip club, I wouldn't, say get out of the car.
Yeah, and I agree the gravity of it does seem to factor in, but then it seems like if you bear a moral responsibility for taking them to Planned Parenthood or an abortion, it's like if driving somehow makes you participate in their behavior, then how can we say that driving them to a strip club doesn't make you somehow participate?
Yeah, to be consistent.
What's the principle that would distinguish one from the other than our assessment of the gravity of the sin that they're going to commit?
Well, but what you could do, I mean, this is like the problem of heaps, and I just got about 10 more seconds, but it's like, you can look at extremes and know the right thing for the extreme, but it's harder to tell where the middle ground is where one moves over. Maybe they're going to watch an X-rated movie or something like that, or... I don't know. It's just, this is where a person has to decide with the best judgment they have the appropriate thing to do. And I guess that's where we'll have to leave it. So hope that helps, Jason. It's a tough one. But thank you for the call. And I think you've done some really good thinking even before you called. Good for you. All right, friends, that's it for this hour. Greg Koukl here for Stand the Reason. Give them heaven. Bye-bye.